Well, last night the Skort debate was settled once and for all when the Camogie Association's special congress voted to allow players to wear either shorts or skirts with an incredible 98% majority. Joining us now to discuss is Fine Gael Senator and former RT sports broadcaster Evanne Ní Chuilinn. Evanne, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. You're back to your original roots again, back in front of the TV cameras, I guess, but for a reason that you've been quite passionate about. About time, do you think this has happened?
Yeah, about time, but at the same time, the process has had to be followed. So it couldn't really have happened any sooner, given that it was, the protest from the Kilkenny-Dublin match was the start of this. And at the time, the Camogie Association did say that it couldn't be revisited until 2027, and then eventually they said 2026. And I think that at that point wasn't really going to be enough. And in fairness to the players, they were very outspoken, but in a very diplomatic way, in a respectful way to the Camogie Association, made their thoughts felt, made their views known to the public, that really there was a way around this much quicker than waiting until either 2026 Congress or 2027 Congress. And in fairness, look what's happened. We've had a Congress within 2 weeks in 2025, and now championship matches starting tomorrow. For the first time in the history of the sport, players can wear shorts. Yeah,
I know. This was before Congress, twice before. So, but this time, seriously different because of the player influence.
Well, what happened was, so it's not that it was before Congress twice, it's just there were two motions at Congress in 2024. One was to allow for the choice and one was to abolish the skirts, and neither of those were accepted. Both were defeated quite heavily. So there was absolutely no appetite for change within Ard Comhairle, so within the people who govern the game and who run the game. But that was completely at odds with what the players would have voted for if they had been given the choice to vote. At that point, the GPA engaged with the Camogie Association in the aftermath of that vote. They engaged immediately with the Camogie Association to try and find some resolution or some way forward. And they really did try and engage a number of times in the 14 months that followed. But they didn't get anywhere. They didn't really... It wasn't a two-way street. And that's why the protest happened. The protest didn't happen out of the blue. The protest happened because there hadn't been any kind of a conversation started. And the answers was always, you got to wait till 2027. And that just wasn't... That didn't feel fair. It didn't feel good enough to the people who actually play the sport. So the protest didn't come about out of the blue. The protest came about really after an awful lot of months and months of really trying to diplomatically look at what could be done. But in the end, and this is what sometimes happens with amateur sport and with women's sport, it gets to a point of protest, and players never want to protest. And we saw that with the women's national team in 2017 around the tracksuits. They never want to be the ones that have to come above the parapet. They never want to be the ones given out because they actually love their sport. But this is what had to happen. And really, the GPA, I think are leaders from a European point of view in that they have given their players a voice and that they are not afraid to use it. I spoke to members this morning who said that they are just so, first of all, relieved, but also so proud of the players and the women that have become role models to younger players playing camogie. There's a 12-year-old in my club who I know wrote a letter to the Camogie Association as early as last year asking for this to be revisited. So the fact that they are seeing strong women stand up for themselves, use their voice and ask for what they need in their sport, and they weren't asking for a lot.
No, they weren't. The common sense had to prevail.
Who's voting, though? Who are the Camogie Association? Because I was looking over the last number of weeks to say who's going to speak up about this. Who are they? Where are they? They were nowhere to be found until last night, really. So who actually are the votes? What's the demographic spread like? Because that's what I'd be interested to know this.
Well, so Camogie Association is obviously, the game is an amateur sport, and it has a volunteer structure, a very strong volunteer structure. And let me say, the game of camogie, the game of hurling would be nowhere without volunteers. So we have to respect that. A lot of these people are volunteers.
And Gaelic games,
and on county boards, exactly. So county board delegates, people who put up nets, people who manage teams, and all of that. So volunteers have to be respected, I'll say that first and foremost, but it is the volunteers at the top of the organisation. So, you would have, club, county board, provincial board, and then Ard Comhairle. So you'd have delegates at the top of their Ard Comhairle delegates. And they would be an awful lot older than the playing population. So
is that the problem? What the problem was here, that it's from just a different generation?
Yeah, I think it's just the structures, okay? It's not necessarily the people's fault who sit on Ard Comhairle, it's just the structure of the organisation is such that those are the people who manage the rules and they're the people who have the votes. Now, I think this is actually something we need to talk about because we're talking about integration, we're talking about moving these games forward. The player voice doesn't sit anywhere in any of the organisations at that level. And now we have an opportunity to make sure that that is changed and rectified in a new GAA when all of the associations, hopefully by 2027, are integrated. So I think what this has shown really is that the player voice doesn't really exist. The GPA had to exist in order for the player voice to get heard.
There's a lot of talk as well about that the men shouldn't have had a vote on this because they were ultimately not the ones having to wear escorts. The men in the association. What's your feeling on that?
Well, again, I mean, if there are men on Ord Corley, and there are a few, it's mostly women, but if there are, it's because they have been volunteering in the game of Camogie for decades. So again, it's not necessarily their fault. It is just the structure of the organisation that is where the vote lies. So maybe the new association, and far be it from me, there are people steering that integration process, but perhaps in the new association we could have the player voice represented at that Ord Corley level.
Okay, but was it a case in previous years, up until the Kilkenny-Dublin-Leinster semi-final when the girls came out in shorts, was it a case of, up at the very top them saying, listen, the tail doesn't wag the dog here?
That's a funny way of putting it. Yeah, I mean, I suppose what you're trying to say, I think, is that the players try to have a voice. Yeah, and that's why the GPA was founded, really, was to give the players a voice. The players don't want to be in control. They want to play sport. Yeah. They want to get out and focus on their matches tomorrow. I think it's a crying shame that Munster final that was postponed with 16 hours notice might never be played. So that was shocking. So we might have an empty 2025 Munster title. Now, if that's the only thing that has, and it's not a great thing to have to sacrifice, but I think that match will probably never be played. The calendar is very full. They probably won't get a chance to play it until the All-Ireland series is finished.
But surely we need to know who the Munster champions are and who the finalists are, who the runners-up are, so that they can go into their necessary games. Whereas now it's a toss of a coin.
I don't know what they'll do. I mean, I did hear Brian Malloy say that it would be played later in the year, which, in principle is great if we get a Munster final. But, if you have one of those two teams, Cork and Waterford, knocked out, maybe 6 weeks before that game is due to be played, players have a life. Maybe they've gone, spend time with their families, they've gone on holidays. When championship is over, when the All-Ireland series is over, very often players do take a break. And so, to tell them 4 weeks later to come back and play a match for a title, it'll be very difficult. So they might not even have a team to field, or they might not have their strongest team to field. So the Munster title probably won't feel like a Munster title. But look, that's just what transpired. It's the way that it worked out. Those two teams were very strong in that they did not want to wear Skorts that weekend. We had a different scenario the following week with the Leinster final, and that's absolutely the players' right as well. So it's just the way it transpired. I do think, Brian Malloy did a lot of advocacy in the last couple of weeks in speaking to our Corley members, and that is to be acknowledged as well, because somebody had to make sure that Ord Corley members were going to vote the way that they were encouraged to vote by players.
International headlines. It
did, yeah. I was reading it on the New York Times this morning.
I know.
It was everywhere, and that is why I actually feel relief this morning and last night. Not necessarily celebration. It's just, okay, well, that needed to happen, so at least it happened, and now we can just start talking about the sport. And again, if all of the people who came out and talked about Skorts and shorts over the last 3 weeks came to a match tomorrow and looked at who won the matches and looked at who the great players were and continued to support Camogie and go to the All-Ireland final later in the summer, then something very positive has come from all of this, negative coverage.
Yeah. But I suppose, speaking of that, the New York Times op-ed this morning, and having a word like Camogie in that, it actually struck me how international this had got, because across the world, not only here in Ireland, there's a struggle to get girls participating in sport, and if they are participating in them, to keep them past their teenage years. I know that's one of the reasons why you swapped the RTE newsroom basically for politics, to make a difference in this. This has damaged it in some way, and I suppose we had a lot of messages from young players over the years going, well, I'm not comfortable, they're trying to keep me in sport, but they're not listening to us, that sort of thing. Yeah. But I mean,
and they step away.
Yeah, they do step away.
14 and 15. Yeah.
So I know the steering committees, etc., and so forth on now. But what needs to be done now to continue to keep girls in sport and encourage them off the back of this bad publicity?
Well, if you're talking just about Camogie, I think the Skort thing will actually make a difference.
But in general, we've rugby, we've
everything,
soccer, everything.
And things, playing gear is a huge
not.
issue. Playing gear is an enormous issue, and we've seen that with rugby. I mean, the white shorts are gone, thankfully.
Yeah.
And that was an issue that has been across the board internationally as well. GB Hockey came out and fought 2 years ago, in relation to Skorts, and it has made a difference in retention rates. I did have messages from parents just saying that their 12 and 13-year-olds were quitting Camogie because they had to start wearing a Skort.
Isn't it?
No, so that was a barrier, and I heard Brian Malloy say that tens of thousands of girls love wearing Skorts. I'm not sure if the proportionality of Skorts to shorts and the preference for it is quite as strong as that. I certainly, any players that I coach and speak to in my club are absolutely thrilled to never have to put on a Skort again. Yeah. I've had messages from some of the players who want to come out of retirement because they want to wear shorts on the field in matches. So no, look, it is to be celebrated.
It's a new dawn, really, isn't it?
It's a new dawn. Yeah.
Actually, speaking of, we were talking to Gavin Riley. He was on earlier on talking about his book, what was the name of the Secrets by Brain Fog Menopause? Secret Life of Leinster House.
I have it at home. I haven't started.
Have you read it yet?
How
have you found the transition? Because it's a bit different, isn't it, from Montrose wandering around the Oireachtas?
Yeah, it is very different. Lots of new politics, and to try and get my head around. But no, I'm having a great time. It is exceptionally busy.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is actually time management. That's what I'm finding. But I'm really enjoying the challenge and the change. I'm on 3 committees, so I will be very busy.
One involving sport as well.
One involving obviously sport, media and communications, and then I will be on the Irish language one and also the drug use committee. So I will be very busy. But I'm looking forward. I think it's always better to be busy than bored.
Yeah.
Okay. And you know about the underground corridors that will get you to places that little bit
without
quicker.
messing your hair.
I do. I know about them. Yes.
Yeah, you've been warned, but that's great. And be friends with the ushers. They're going to be your best mates.
They're my bestos. Yeah.
Listen, thank you so much for joining us on the show.